Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Unpacking Articles. For those who don't know me, I am Florencia Henshaw. I have a PhD in SLA from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and that's me right there. Today we're going to be reading SLA Research in/for the classroom by the great Patsy Lightbown. Essentially, what Lightbown is doing in this article is summarizing 10 generalizations about second language acquisition based on research. She first wrote the generalizations in 1985, revised them in 2000, and revised them again in 2003. Let's start with the first three. The first one says that adults and adolescents can acquire a second language. What she's trying to say here is that it's not just children who can learn implicitly, but also adults and adolescents. That being said, Lightbown is also a proponent of focus on form, meaning that sometimes they do need a little nudging to notice certain things in the input. The second one is that learners create a systematic interlanguage. The point here is that this interlanguage is telling us that they are acquiring the language. This reminds me of what Bill Van Patten says, that there's no such thing as errors, right? Because error has a very negative connotation. Instead, it's just forms the learners are producing as they build this linguistic system. And the third one is that there are predictable sequences in second language acquisition, at least for some languages in some forms. This is what research has shown. Why is this important to point out? Because perhaps instruction has a limited effect in changing the order of these sequences. And also, Lightbown wants to highlight that these steps towards progress, or the steps towards acquisition, they're not always in the sense of being more accurate. Sometimes in these sequences, the next step sounds less accurate than the step before. And I have a couple of quotes here to share with you about these points. So the first one says, while there is wide agreement that learners come to know things that were never the subject of explicit teaching, there's also evidence that instruction can enhance language acquisition. So this is where she's trying to make that point that perhaps it's not all of it implicitly, that some focus on form might be helpful. And yes, that is debatable, and there are different camps in SLA that argue one way or the other. The other quote is, the value of developmental sequences research is in helping teachers adapt their expectations of how progress can be seen in something other than an increase in accuracy. I love that quote because usually we think that progress means more target-like. Okay, let's talk about the next 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this is where it gets good. So 4 is, practice does not make perfect. Of course, here it all depends on how you define practice, right? Practice is one of those words that some people like and some people don't, because we're all picturing different things. Lightbown here is talking about practice in the sense of repetitive drills and memorization. That's what she says. It just does not help a whole lot. I would also perhaps add that nothing makes perfect. All right, number 5. Knowing a rule does not mean you can use it. I think we can all relate or agree to this. We know a lot of rules and sometimes we don't follow them. By the same token, many native speakers use a lot of rules that cannot verbalize. So this explicit knowledge of rules versus using them, the connection is a bit unclear. So my take on that is, why spend so much time discussing rules? Okay, number 6, isolated error correction is usually ineffective. One thing you may notice of this generalization is the adjectives and adverbs that go along with it. Isolated, usually, ineffective. All right, how do we define all of that, right? There's a little bit of room for interpretation, and different people are going to draw different conclusions from it. And definitely, corrective feedback deserves many more episodes and a lot more unpacking. So for now, I guess all we'll say is that curb your expectations. I think that's my take on what Lightbown is trying to say here, right? That just because you correct something, it doesn't mean that now the issue is gone. Couple quotes from this section. So the first one is that when practice is defined as experience in using language for meaningful interaction, then practice is likely to be more predictive of long-term success. And of course, I like this quote because she clarifies that practice can have many different meanings. And of course, if we think of practice as having opportunities to use the language meaningfully, great. And the second quote is, learners' spontaneous language use does not suddenly change when they are told that they have made an error. And I like this quote because it's a very friendly reminder of the perhaps limited, if any, effect that corrective feedback can have on acquisition. Okay, let's keep going. 7, 8, and 9 to me are all about expectations and goals. Number 7 is that most adult learners do not achieve native-like mastery. This is something that we probably already knew or we may have experienced ourselves. But to me, what it's saying is, why are we so obsessed with being native-like? Or are we perhaps pushing our learners to be native-like too soon or too fast? That's what I take from that section. Number 8, 1 hour a day is not enough. I think all of us can agree with that. When we're talking about language acquisition in an institutional or educational setting, we have so many constraints, right? And certainly contact time or how much time we have with our students is a big constraint. So again, expectations. How much can we achieve? And number 9 is just a friendly reminder of how complex the task of acquiring a language is. And that is because language is complex. And Lightbown is saying that a lot of times when we're teaching a language, we simplify that complex task by giving some rules, giving some vocab list, and sort of reducing language acquisition to just learning these elements of the language. But of course, language learning is much more than that, and it is actually a lifelong endeavor. And the very last one, number 10, says that learners understand contextualized language much more than decontextualized language. That makes sense. And also that learners can comprehend a lot more than what they can produce. Again, that's something that we may have experienced ourselves as language learners. So what does this mean? So for the first part of contextualized versus decontextualized language, Lightbown says that perhaps when we're giving the learner so much context that they're relying entirely on the context to extract meaning, they might not be noticing some things about the language. And so it's just to think about how we process language. And the second part reminds me of a meme that I recently tweeted that essentially when we're looking at interpretive communication, understanding something written or oral, we can do pretty well. But even if we are at that level with interpretive communication, our presentational or interpersonal skills might be a little lower. So again, let's just have realistic expectations about what the learners can do with each of the 3 modes. And Lightbown concludes by discussing this relationship between research and teaching. And there is one quote that I think is beautiful as a way of concluding the article. And it says, "It is only when teachers have tried out some of the pedagogical applications suggested by SLA Research that they will understand what it really means for their own teaching context." In other words, We need to dialogue instead of dismiss each other so quickly. Researchers should not be dismissing teachers and their concerns, particularly when it comes to their own context, and at the same time, teachers should not be dismissing research as something that is not applicable to them. That's just my take on it. As usual, I encourage you to read the article for yourself and draw your own conclusions. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.